a man called Colin Thurman, who is trying to find out what happened to his daughter Cindy, who disappeared when she was 16 many, many years ago, and about which he has known nothing until fairly recently, when he starts to receive a number of rather odd messages, clues, riddles, puzzles that eventually lead him on a trail, a long trail, which will take 4 books to cover, to find out what happened to his daughter Cindy. I'm going to read from the second book, which is called The Morning Light Conspiracy, this one here. When I'm selling my books at town markets and places like that, people often come up to me and ask me, is this based on a true story? And I always say no. And then almost inevitably, they then walk away without buying a book. So obviously it's the wrong answer. In the case of the second book, The Morning Light Conspiracy, I can honestly say that it actually is based on a true story, sort of. The title gives it away, The Morning Light Conspiracy. Operation Morning Light was a joint American-Canadian operation in the late 70s to pick up the pieces of a nuclear-powered Russian spy satellite that had disintegrated over Canada in 1978. It was Kosmos 954. And the story in this particular book is based around that particular event. But I went further. I made something up about it, something that was part of that satellite that isn't actually true, as far as I know. So I'm going to start to read from fairly close to the beginning of that book. And it starts off with an email. It's called Subject, Our Next Adventure, date Monday, February 27, 2006. To Colin Thurman. Dear Mr. Thurman, I've been thinking about Cindy. I'm sure you have too. I recommend you now take the next step. First, why don't you talk to John, see what he knows of funny situations. There was no name with it, but it was hardly necessary. Harry had sent it. I knew that without him telling me. Despite his promise to ensnare me in another of his mysteries, then tell me what he knew about my daughter, I sometimes wondered if I would ever hear from him again. Thought maybe I'd be glad not to, but now here he was again, twisting the dagger. Harry is actually a rather secretive ex-cop who has his own rather sinister agenda and is doling out the clues to what might have happened to his daughter, Cindy. All the terror and fear came back to me in a flash. God damn him, I thought. Images of my daughter flooded back into my mind, and for a while, I sat in my computer chair as the memories came back to me of how she had disappeared 16 years ago when she was 16, and how we had never found any clues at all to what had happened to her. I still imagine sometimes that she would just show up one day as if nothing had ever happened, although I knew in my bones that she must be dead. Now Harry was stirring things up again. The last time Harry and I had interacted, I had caused a man to kill himself. I'd meant to, of course, but Harry had seen exactly how it would play out. He was evil, that's all there was to it, and I really wanted nothing more to do with him. But I could hardly leave this alone, as he must well have known. For the moment, however, I didn't want my wife to know. I'd have to tell her eventually, but I knew she'd be upset, and I wanted to find out first if there really was anything in this, or whether it was just Harry being nasty. I told Linda I was going to give the car some exercise, was feeling a bit cabin feverish. I got into the car, started it, and headed down Highway 211 towards the bridge. On a day like today, summer seemed a long way away. Like a vague dream, the world was white and dazzling, and it didn't look as if it had ever been green. Grass and leaves were ancient memories. As I passed over the Winnipeg River, it was steaming upstream of the bridge, but below it, ice had jammed up tightly, covering the water entirely. The John that Harry referred to was Corporal John Samard. He'd been helpful to me last year when I was trying to find out what had happened to Stephanie Shawcross, a young woman who had disappeared in 1965 while driving to the Whiteshell. I called the Falcon Lake detachment on my cell phone, and much to my relief found that he was still based there. He was out on patrol, the constable who answered the phone told me, but he'd be back later unless something came up. The car sped smoothly and enthusiastically down the highway, down past Elma and Haddishville, and then east onto the Trans-Canada. There I set the cruise control and held the steering wheel while the miles unwound. There was little traffic, and that mostly trucks tucked in on the slow lane, although mostly going 110. I set the cruise to about 120, and then spent a lot of time in the fast lane, crawling slowly past them. The road was bare and dry. Sooner than I expected, I came to the signs for restaurants and motels, and a little later the glimmer of flat white through the trees. I just got onto the two-lane section that starts just before the Ontario border when I heard a siren and looked at my rearview mirror to see a police car behind me, lights flashing. I pulled over onto the shoulder and brought the car to a stop. The police car stopped behind me and a policeman approached my side of the car. I lowered the window. "I thought it might be you," Simard said. "I should give you a ticket." "Hell," I said, "you've done enough just giving the truckers something to smile about, seeing me get my comeuppance in my fancy car. Anyway, John, why don't you come in and sit down for a while? I need to talk to you." Simard came around to the passenger side, opened the door and got in and sat down in the seat. "So what are you up to these days when you're not violating the highway code?" he asked me. "Harry's been in touch," I told him. "Damn." "Yeah, that's about the size of it. The bastard mentioned my daughter, said I should talk to you, that there were funny things I should ask you about." I passed him a printout of the email. "Funny things?" Simard said. "Harry usually chooses his words well," I said. Simard shrugged. "Doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe you should come back to the office. I can poke around, try to figure out what he means." "Sounds like a plan." "Okay," he said, "let's go. Oh, and remember one thing. I can break the speed limit and you can't. Got it?" I grinned as he got out of the car and walked back to the cruiser. I pulled back onto the highway and drove at 110. He flashed past me with a toot of the horn and a wave. At the police station, there was no sign of Constable Timmins. What happened to the chief's name is top secret fella?" I asked. Simard laughed. "Timmins was reassigned someplace up north, I hope," Simard said. "Checking on grow-ups and illegal cigarette smuggling, maybe, or perhaps doing the polar bear patrol." I'd never been in his office before. It was Spartan but orderly. Simard usually believed in keeping things tidy. Me, I'm an overflowing desk type, but not Simard. In fact, apart from the phone, an in and out tray, a computer terminal, and a photo of a woman, there was nothing on his desk. "I thought they'd make you chief when Harry left," I said. Simard laughed. "Not a chance. You have to take exams. That means studying for them. I'm just not there yet. To be frank, I'm not sure I ever want to be there. In the meantime, though, I guess you're shorthanded." "Colin, we're always shorthanded. That's just a fact of life in this business. Too many bad guys and not enough good guys." "Then I guess I have to appreciate you taking the time to help me figure out what Harry meant even more." "Let's see if I can find anything in his files," Simard suggested, and led me to another room at the end of the building. It was larger than Simard's, but unlike his, was windowless. There was a desk, a bigger one than Simard's, a computer monitor, a couple of phones, filing cabinets, two very uncomfortable-looking wooden chairs, and a large safe. There was also a large Canadian flag stuck in the corner of the room next to a coat tree. "Don't know where he stashed the whiskey," Simard joked. "Never offered any to me at any rate. So let's look in the files." He opened the nearest cabinet, pulled out the drawer, and started thumbing through the files. "What did he say? Funny files?" I looked at the email. "Funny situations." John said, "Oh," closed the drawer and opened the one underneath it. He started thumbing through it, then stopped. "Jesus," he said. He pulled out a file, took it over to the desk, dropped it onto the desk, and sat down on the chair. He looked up at me. "Have a seat," he said. "Make yourself uncomfortable." I sat down in one of the hostile-looking chairs, which fulfilled its promise. John was leafing through the contents of the file, pausing now and then to examine particular documents more closely. Christ, he said again. You seem very pious today, John, I said. John shook his head. Do you know the bastard has a file here called, guess what? Funny situations? Got it in one. And do you know what? What makes it even funnier is that there were a couple of CSIS guys hanging around today. And they came in here and asked me if there was anything funny going on. The spy guys, you mean? And they said, funny? Yep. Canada Security Intelligence Service. And yes, they used the word funny. I shook my head. That's kind of scary. What's in the file? I'm not sure if I should show you this stuff or not, John admitted. I just don't know. I can't make head or tail of it. Oh, some of it seems straightforward, but it's almost more of the same kind of nonsense he was doing with you before. As if he's been preparing another little game to play. In which case, you might as well show it to me, I argued. Maybe, maybe not. Look, Colin, I can't just hand this over just because Harry mentioned the file in his email. Tell you what I'll do, though. I'll look it over in the next couple of days and let you know. How's that? You know, if there really is something there that directly or indirectly has anything to do with my daughter, I'm going to want to follow it up, I said. John nodded. Sure, I understand. Good to see you, Colin. I'll be in touch. So the car had got its exercise, but I wasn't much further forward, except that there was a file called Funny Situation, just as if Harry had been preparing for this too. Could I trust him here anymore than it turned out I could the first time around? Not likely, I thought. What game is he playing this time, I wondered, and who might get hurt? As I came out of the office, I had a sudden recollection of coming here in the late fall last year. I'd intended to go to the beach for one last visit, store it up for the winter. But it ended up wasting time at the police station chasing down something Harry had let drop. In the end, I hadn't gone on the sand, and then winter had struck, and it had become like so much in life, where you realize only afterwards that the last of something has already occurred, has slipped through your fingers and vanished forever into the past. I shook off the strange feeling and got back into the car. The journey back to Pinawa was uneventful at first. It was when I turned off the Trans-Canada Highway onto Highway 11 that I first noticed a gray Crown Victoria behind me. It cruised too far back for me to see if it was possibly an unmarked police car or who was in it. For the first few kilometers, it kept pace with me, and I stopped worrying about it. Then suddenly it came up fast behind me, and before I could react, bumped me at an angle at the left-hand corner of the car, sending it into a wild skid and quickly off the road. There was nothing I could do. It happened so quickly, and I was off the road before I could respond or try to correct the skid. The car smashed with the snowbank left by the plow and slid on down into the deep snow into the ditch, and the airbags went off. There was no sign of the gray car now, indicating the collision had been deliberate. I'd seen the car only at the last minute before it suddenly appeared behind me and hit my car, but I knew they'd run me off the road on purpose. Were they hoping I'd be hurt? Fortunately, I was only shaken up after the sudden violent turn of events. Gingerly, I undid my seatbelt, brushed off the powder from the airbags, and looked out and looked back towards the road. Another car approached slowly, pulled carefully over onto the shoulder, and stopped. I felt a sense of relief. The Good Samaritans had arrived so quickly. 2 men got out, but my hope soon soured as I saw that they were wearing balaclavas. Somehow I didn't think it was because of the cold. Maybe it was because of the wooden clubs they were holding, not the usual tool for helping someone dig themselves out of the snow. This was obviously intended to be discouragement of some kind, perhaps triggered by my visit to Samard. I was in no mood for being beaten with wooden clubs, but there was nothing in the car to defend myself with. I got out of the car. What was I supposed to do? Run for it? In this deep snow, I'd not get far. And even if I made it to the road, it was unlikely anyone else was going to come along to rescue me anytime soon, as this was about as lonely a stretch of highway as it was possible to imagine. I think at that point, I'm going to leave you in suspense, a sort of cliffhanger. You'll have to read the book to find out what happened next. But I'm going to read something else, if I may, something that's not in these 4-book series, something that I wrote last year when COVID-19 was in full throw of shutting everything down, and we were all a bit new to it, and vaccines were not on the horizon. It's a short story called The Quartet. Officially, it was the Retired Gentlemen's Club, although it wasn't really a club, and there was nothing official about it. In fact, the members, all 6 of them, refer to it to themselves as the Old Farts, although usually not with capital letters. They met every Thursday morning at the Pinawa Club for coffee and blather. They were all men, although in their view, there was nothing stopping women joining if they wanted. They'd nothing against women, quite the opposite. And one woman had sat with them for a while, but she stopped coming after a few sessions, much to their disappointment, complaining that all they ever talked about was sports and who had died. It's true that they did pore over obituaries, perhaps more than was healthy. Possibly it was a form of survivor's guilt, as he thought about what so-and-so had been like when he was young and active, and wondered how it was that he was dead and they were still alive. Colin Thurman didn't belong to the club, although one of his friends had asked him on several occasions if he'd like to come along. But in each case, Colin had demurred. It's true that officially he was retired. He'd had a celebration about it, planned to take up a couple of new hobbies, but he seemed unable to turn down contracts that kept coming up, or just on his own initiative, solving small mysteries. By now, his wife Linda was getting exasperated with him. 1 or 2 of the jobs had certainly had elements of danger about them. Retired means retired, she kept telling him. But it turned out he was very poor at saying no, or resisting his own inclination to fix things. So in his mind, he didn't qualify to be a member of the group. Not only was he not really retired, he wasn't really sure he was a gentleman either, and he certainly didn't consider himself a fart, old or otherwise. Of course, now that that nasty thing with 30,000 nucleosides was infecting and sometimes killing creatures with several billion of them, meeting at the club, or anywhere for that matter, was out. The library was closed, the community center and Vanier centers also. Shopping was awkward. Strangers were a threat. You couldn't get a slot for Walmart or Superstore curbside pickup to save your life. And now the final straw was the closing of the Ironwood Trail, supposedly because some yahoos didn't practice social distancing. It was a bitter blow for everyone, and Colin felt it deeply. One of the traditions of this old group of old guys was to celebrate each other's birthday. Usually that meant brandy or some other high ethanol content drink would be poured surreptitiously into the coffee, and there'd usually be a cake from Solar with candles. Just a few, no point rubbing it in. Cigars, unfortunately, were out. This year, March 29, was Gerald's turn. Only, of course, getting together anywhere was potentially life-threatening, maybe even illegal, with the threat of asymptomatic carriers, community transmission, and other terms not normally present in ordinary conversation. Still, Gerald was turning 80, and they all agreed in their emails that it was important to recognize and celebrate the occasion. The problem was nobody knew what to do. How do you celebrate a birthday when getting together was hazardous to your health and would gain the disapproval of nosy neighbors? Most of the members, although not all, had an aversion to Facebook and Twitter or any other kind of technology of that sort. So they backed and forth via telephone, email, and the occasional text, until finally one of them came up with a plan. A couple of them didn't think they could do it, claimed to lack the necessary skill, although that was considered by the others just to be an excuse. One member said he would just embarrass himself, and was told in no uncertain terms that it wasn't about him, it was about Gerald. Well, of course, the day came, as days have a habit of doing, and it turned out that only 3 of them could make it. It needed a 4th, one for each corner of Gerald's house. So Colin was asked in a last-minute phone call to participate. Once again, Colin's inability to say no came to the rescue. It had snowed the day before, much to everyone's irritation. It was supposed to be spring, but winter is a long-term resident in Manitoba and always has its bags packed, ready to visit the province. Now the sun was out, and the snow was already subliming and melting. As they approached Gerald's house, they took care to maintain a good separation. Each of them took up position at one corner of the house near a window, so that all 4 quadrants were occupied. Then one of them called Gerald and told him to open his windows. When he had done so, on a signal, they all began. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Gerald, happy birthday to you. It wasn't a chorus that would have won acclaim at any music gathering, but it did the job, and that was all that mattered. Each of them had brought a balloon, and they now leased them, watched them drift away in the breeze, waved at Gerald, who beamed back at them from inside the house, and then made their way separately and safely back home. Colin thought to himself, smiling in satisfaction at what they'd done, that when things returned to normal, if ever there would be such a thing as normal again, that maybe, just maybe, he'd drop by one Thursday morning and join in the conversation. Until then, well, maybe he'd practice his singing. And that's all for me. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting.
Hi again.
Hi.
Thank you so much. It's great. Again, I said the video being read too. This has been recorded and we can arrange to have it shared later. And we lost our couple people along the way somewhere. It might have just been bad connections, but I'll try and get in touch with them and share the whole reading. And now, oh, where are your books available?
Well, they can be bought on Amazon.ca.
Okay.
You have to look under Michael Owen Luke. It's important to do that, otherwise you'll get lost in the vast number of other books that are out there. They're all there. If anyone's local, of course, they can always give me a shout, call, and they can drop by, or I can drop by them and sell them one. I've done that to a few people on occasion.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating in our Safe at Home Writers on the River. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.